I remember the day I first heard Bob Dylan. It was like being hit by a bolt of lightning. I was just a kid, but that music changed something in me, something deep and invisible. It was as if the world I thought I knew suddenly twisted and revealed a hidden door, a secret passage to a place where words and music could create magic. Dylan once said that if we take responsibility for ourselves, we can then take responsibility for others. It sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest things to do. He believed that his songs could help people understand themselves better, and I think he was right. When I listen to his music, I don't just hear the words. I feel the emotions, the struggle, the hope. It's like he's talking directly to me, helping me figure out who I am. Back in the mid-60s, Dylan decided to play with a band, and it was a big deal. People were shocked. They expected him to stay the same, the solo folk singer with the acoustic guitar. But Dylan knew he had to change to grow. He felt it in his bones, and he followed that feeling, even though it meant facing a lot of resistance. That act of doing what he felt in the moment, despite what others thought, was a powerful lesson. It showed that true art comes from being true to yourself. When I heard that Dylan's new album, Bringing It All Back Home, was about to be released, I was excited. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew it would be something special. The musicians on that album were amazing. They had this funky, groovy sound that made the music come alive. It wasn't just the lyrics that mattered. It was the way the music felt, the way it moved through time. It was like the songs were breathing, and I could feel each breath. But it wasn't just Dylan who understood this. The Beatles, those four guys from Liverpool, were also changing the game. They weren't just making music. They were creating a new kind of spirituality. John Lennon once said that Elvis Presley was bigger than religion in his life. When he first heard Elvis, it was like a religious conversion. He found a new way to express himself, a way to connect with something bigger than himself. Paul McCartney felt the same way. He described their early sessions listening to rock and roll records as worshiping. They were devoted to the music, and it became a kind of religion for them. Elvis was their guru, their messiah. They never covered his songs on their records, almost as if he was a god they couldn't touch. It was a sign of how much they respected him, how much he meant to them. The Beatles fans were just as devoted. When the group played, it was like a religious ritual. People would scream and cry, and it wasn't just because the Beatles were good-looking. It was because the music touched something deep inside them, something that made them feel alive and connected. But the Beatles were always aware of the irony in all of this. They didn't take themselves too seriously, and that's part of what made them so special. They could talk about spiritual stuff with a wink and a smile, and it made their message even more powerful. They were able to hold onto their belief while also being critical of it, and that's a rare and valuable skill. The Beatles came from Liverpool, a place that was considered a cultural backwater by the establishment in London, but that's what made them unique. They were outsiders, and that gave them a different perspective. It's like they saw the world through a different lens, a lens that allowed them to see the magic in everyday things. And that magic is what they brought to their music. George Harrison once said that Western philosophy is too focused on material things, on what we can see and touch. But he believed that there was more to life, something deeper and more meaningful. He was talking about mysticism, about the idea that there's a spiritual dimension to everything. The Beatles' music was like a bridge to that dimension, a way to connect with something greater than ourselves. So the next time you listen to a Bob Dylan or Beatles song, try to feel it, not just hear it. Let the music take you on a journey and see where it leads you. You might be surprised by what you discover. I remember when I first discovered rock and roll. It was like a magical portal, opening up a whole new world. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr were more than just musicians to us. They were like modern-day prophets. They showed us that there was something deeper, something more meaningful, beyond the everyday routines of life. John Lennon, in particular, felt a strong connection to rock and roll. He would listen to the radio broadcasts from Radio Luxembourg every week, almost like a spiritual ritual. For him, it wasn't just about the music. It was about the feeling, the dreams, and the possibilities it brought. His friends noticed this too. They saw him as someone with a special gift, someone who just knew what to do. It was as if he had a direct line to the heart of the music. Paul McCartney had a similar experience. After his mother passed away, he found solace in rock and roll. Listening to the music was like a form of meditation for him. He would lose himself in the sound, floating in a dreamlike state, not even thinking, just feeling. This music became his world, his escape, and his inspiration. The Beatles' early days were filled with a sense of calling, a feeling that they were meant to do something great. When they played in Hamburg, it was like a baptism by fire. The Star Club where they performed was a cavernous place, a kind of rock and roll cathedral. The music they played there was intense, and it brought people together in a way that was almost spiritual. As they grew more famous, the Beatles started to see themselves as more than just a band. John Lennon, in particular, toyed with the idea of being a messianic figure. He said things like, "We're more popular than Jesus now," and sang about being crucified in The Ballad of John and Yoko. He saw himself as a messenger, spreading a message of peace and love. But he was also aware of the irony in all of this. He didn't take himself too seriously and often rejected the idea of being a messiah, especially in songs like God and Imagine. The Beatles' success was built on a deep sense of faith and belief. John and Paul believed that they were meant to do something special. When they were still struggling in Liverpool, they would often joke, "Where are we going, boys?" And the others would respond, "To the top, Johnny, to the top." This was more than just a joke. It was a declaration of their intention to succeed. They believed in themselves, and that belief carried them through the tough times. Even when things looked bleak, like when they couldn't get a recording contract, they never gave up. Brian Epstein, their manager, took a huge risk on them. He believed in them, even though most people thought they had nothing going for them. But the Beatles had an unshakable sense that they were destined for greatness. They knew they had something new and meaningful to offer, and they were determined to share it with the world. The fans in Liverpool, especially those at the Cavern Club, were part of this belief system too. When DJ Bob Wooler announced that the Beatles would be wearing new suits the next time they performed, it was like a revelation. The crowd ate it up, and it became part of the Beatles' legend. It was as if everything they did was a sign of their greatness, a part of their myth. The Beatles' journey was a powerful example of the power of belief and intention. They showed that with faith, hard work, and a bit of magic, anything is possible. They changed the world, not just with their music, but with the way they lived and the message they shared. They were more than just a band. They were a phenomenon, a symbol of the human spirit's ability to rise above the ordinary and create something truly special. The Beatles were more than just a band. They were a movement, a wave that swept through the world, changing the way people thought and felt. I remember reading about how they could be seen as a deeply spiritual phenomenon, or just a pop culture fad driven by fame and money. James, a famous philosopher, believed that rationality can find valid arguments for both views. It's all about what you choose to believe in, based on how you feel and what you see in the world around you. When the Beatles burst onto the scene, they had a way of making people believe in something bigger than themselves. The audience's belief in the Beatles, and the Beatles' belief in their mission, created a powerful feedback loop. It was a cycle of energy and creativity that pushed everyone to new heights. People were hungry for something to believe in, and the Beatles gave them that. Their faith in each other and in their music made all the difference. Brian Epstein, the Beatles' manager, once said that the band glowed in their new suits. Think about it when you see someone you really admire. Don't they seem to radiate a special kind of light? It didn't matter if the Beatles were literally glowing. What mattered was that people felt it. This feeling had a real impact on how the crowd felt, and it created a sense of wonder and excitement. It's like when you watch a magical performance and you're just in awe. You don't question it, you just feel it. The Beatles and their fans maintained a healthy balance of belief and skepticism. They believed in the magic of their music, but they also had a sense of humor about it. When John Lennon wrote a story about a man descending on a flaming pie and naming the band Beatles with an A, it was a playful way of saying, "We know this sounds wild, but just go with it." This kind of humor allowed them to walk the tightrope between sincere belief and playful skepticism. It was a new kind of revelation, one that you had to look at in just the right way to see. The Beatles didn't just want to be famous in Britain. They had their sights set on America. America was like a promised land for them, a place where they could bring their version of rock and roll back to its roots. Their manager, Brian Epstein, shared their dream and believed in it. He saw the potential and pushed for an American tour. When they finally made it to America in 1964 and performed on The Ed Sullivan Show, it was a moment of revelation. All their hard work and belief had paid off, but the road wasn't always easy. On a tour with Roy Orbison in 1963, the Beatles relied on amphetamines to keep up their energy. It's a bit like how some people in primal cultures use sacred medicines in rituals. The Beatles saw these pills as a way to keep going, to stay on top of their game. But this kind of dependence can be dangerous, as we saw with Elvis Presley, who struggled with addiction. The Beatles' success also transformed Liverpool, a city in the north of England, into a kind of holy place. It became a mecca for music, a place where teenagers from all over the country made pilgrimages. It's like how people visit religious sites to feel a sense of connection. Liverpool became the center of a cultural revolution, just like Nashville for country music or New Orleans for jazz. Each of these cities became a focus of attention, a place where people could hang their hopes and dreams. In the end, the Beatles were more than just a band. They were a symbol of a new way of thinking and feeling, a way that combined belief and skepticism, intuition and intellect. They showed that it's possible to believe in something greater than yourself and still keep a healthy dose of skepticism. They were a part of a larger cultural shift that changed the world, and their impact is still felt today. I remember the first time I heard the Beatles. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. The music, the energy, it felt like a part of me that I didn't even know existed was suddenly awakened. And I wasn't the only one. Millions of people around the world felt the same way. It was as if the Beatles were a spark that ignited a fire in all of us. In 1963, when the Beatles met the Rolling Stones, it was clear that something big was happening. It wasn't just the Beatles. There was a whole wave of change sweeping through the music scene. Like a tea kettle coming to a boil, the culture was bubbling with new ideas and energy. The Beatles and the Stones were like the bubbles on the surface, but there was a current pulling them along, something bigger than any one band. As the Beatles' fame grew, so did the intensity of their fans' reactions. Concerts turned into mass events where people would scream, cry, and lose themselves in the music. It was like a religious experience. People believed in the Beatles, not just as musicians, but as symbols of something new and exciting. The fans, especially the young women, would scream and try to touch the Beatles, as if they were trying to connect with something beyond the ordinary. In 1963, the Beatles became more than just a band. They were a phenomenon. Everything they did seemed to have a deeper meaning. It was like the world was waiting for them, and when they arrived, everything changed. The fans treated the Beatles like gods, and the band itself seemed to be swept up in the momentum. They had little control over what was happening. It was as if they were riding a wave that was bigger than any of them. The Beatles' concerts were like modern-day religious rites. People would lose themselves in the music, and the energy was so intense that it felt like a natural force. John Lennon once tried to quiet the crowd, but it was impossible. The music and the energy had taken on a life of their own. The Beatles were the catalysts, but the transformation was happening through the collective passion of the fans. Even the Beatles themselves had a sense of irony about their fame. They knew that the magic could disappear as quickly as it appeared, and they tried to make the most of the moment. They understood that their time in the spotlight was precious, and they wanted to create something that would last. This is why their music and their story continue to resonate with people today. Not everyone was a fan, though. Some people, like Ian MacDonald, saw the Beatles as a cultural phenomenon that needed to be critiqued. He wrote a book about the Beatles that was sometimes harsh, but even his criticism showed how deeply the Beatles had influenced the culture. The Beatles weren't just a band, they were a movement, and even their critics couldn't ignore the impact they had. By 1964, the Beatles were a global sensation. They were more than just music. They were a symbol of a changing world. People were disillusioned with the status quo, and the Beatles represented something new and exciting. They were part of a larger cultural shift that was challenging the old ways of thinking and living. The Beatles were at the forefront of this change, and their influence extended beyond music to fashion, politics, and even spirituality. The Beatles helped create a new kind of society, a separate entity that was distinct from the old world. They were like midwives, helping to bring a new way of being into the world. This new way of thinking and living integrated elements of the past with the modern, creating a synthesis that was greater than the sum of its parts. The Beatles' impact was so profound that even today, their music and their story continue to inspire and influence people. They were a catalyst for a cultural revolution that changed the way we see the world. And in many ways, their legacy is still unfolding, reminding us that the power of music and art can transform not just individuals, but entire societies. I've always felt like there was something special about me, something that pushed me to create and share my music. It's a hard thing to explain, but it's like I had a strong sense of destiny from a young age. This feeling was something that guided me, even when I didn't know where I was going. When I was in my early 20s, I met Archibald MacLeish, who was the Librarian of Congress during World War II. He told me that I had inherited something metaphysical from a bygone era. He said my work would be a touchstone for generations to come. It was a lot to take in, especially when people started calling me things like prophet and Messiah. I never asked for any of that, but it kept coming up. I was just trying to be true to myself and the music I felt inside. One of the most important things I learned was to stay present. I couldn't relate to anything other than what I was doing at the present time. This might sound strange, but it's like being in a state of no mind, where you're completely focused on the moment. It's a bit like Zen Buddhism, where you're so present that you can feel the future unfolding. This approach helped me sense the contours of what was to come, even if I didn't fully understand it. I remember a time when I was just a teenager, and I played some songs in the lobby of the Veterans Memorial Building in Hibbing, where Gorgeous George, the famous wrestler, was having a match. George walked in, and he seemed like a giant, full of energy and charisma. He glanced at me, and I swear he winked and mouthed, "You're making it come alive." Whether he actually said it or not, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I felt seen and validated by someone I admired. It gave me the confidence to keep going, even when no one else was paying attention. As I grew older, I realized that my music was more than just a hobby. It was a way for me to connect with something bigger than myself. People often asked me why I was so popular, but I never really had an answer. It just happened. I was doing what felt right, and somehow it resonated with others. My producer, Bob Johnston, even said that I was driven by something beyond myself, something he called the Holy Spirit. Whether you believe in that or not, there was definitely something guiding me. I've always believed that the world has a way of guiding you if you're open to it. Sometimes all it takes is a small sign, a wink or a nod to show you the way. Even during tough times, when things seem stuck, the world gives subtle hints to those who are receptive. It's about being prepared for inspiration and being ready to follow the path when it presents itself. I've learned that you can't always get what you want, but if you stay true to yourself and your sense of destiny, you might just find your way. It's a journey, and it's different for everyone, but the key is to stay present and let the world show you the way. I always felt like the radio had a magical power. Back when I was a kid, it was like a spiritual thing, a way to feel better when things were down. I remember thinking that the radio could just lay its hands on you and make everything all right. It was the voices, the music, and the stories that made me feel connected to the world in a way that nothing else could. The radio wasn't just a machine. It was a guide, a teacher, and a friend. I spent countless hours listening, and it was through the radio that I discovered Woody Guthrie. Guthrie's music was like a revelation to me. His songs were about the land, the people, and the struggles that connected us all. I felt a deep connection to him, almost as if he was a part of my own family. His songs helped me see the world in a new way, a way that was both real and full of hope. I remember the moment I decided to sing only Guthrie's songs. It felt like I didn't have a choice. It was as if Guthrie himself was calling to me from the past, saying, "I'll be going away, but I'm leaving this job in your hands. I know I can count on you." It was a strange feeling, like I was being chosen for something bigger than myself. I felt like I was Guthrie's greatest disciple, and that his songs were a prophecy of things to come. Guthrie's music wasn't just old, it was timeless. It spoke to the present and the future. I felt like his songs were forecasting changes in the world, changes that I could help bring about. It was as if Guthrie had left a legacy for me to carry forward. I felt a sense of destiny, a feeling that I was meant to do this. It wasn't just a choice, it was a calling. When I moved to New York, I found myself drawn to the Gaslight, the most famous folk club in the city. I didn't just want to play there, I needed to. It felt like there was no other choice. I was in the grip of something bigger than myself, something that was pushing me forward. It was during this time that I started to see myself as someone who was meant to be a part of a larger story, a story that was unfolding around me. I remember playing with Harry Belafonte at a recording session. It felt like a moment of anointing, like Belafonte was passing the torch to me. His greatness seemed to rub off on me, and it gave me the confidence I needed to step into the role I felt was mine. It was a blessing and a curse, but I knew that this was my fate. I was meant to be a voice for change, a voice that could help people see the world in a different way. I felt like I was part of a bigger movement, a movement that was about to change the world. I couldn't explain it in a logical way, but I could feel it. It was like the world was on the edge of something new, and I was being called to be a part of it. It was a jump into the unknown, a leap of faith, but I knew that I had to take it. The radio, Guthrie's songs, and the moments of anointing all pointed to a new world, a world where things could be different, where people could connect and understand each other in new ways. I felt like I was being used as a tool for something bigger than myself, something that was trying to break through the misty curtain of everyday life. It was a powerful feeling, and it gave me the strength to keep going, even when things got tough. I was part of a story that was bigger than me, and I was determined to play my part. I remember the first time I really understood that something big was about to change. It was like the moment before sunrise when the sky is still dark, but you can feel the light coming. It's a quick change, but when it happens, it feels like the world has shifted. That's how it felt, like everything was about to reorganize itself, and I was right in the middle of it. When I first saw Mike Seeger perform, it was one of those moments. Something in me clicked. I realized that if I wanted to create something new, I had to leave behind the comfort of my old life. It was a deal I made with myself, a promise to follow this path no matter where it led. I told myself that I was destined for something more, and I had to hold up my end of the bargain. Some people are meant to be good sailors, some are meant to till the land, and some are meant to be good friends. But I knew I was meant to be a songwriter. I had to believe that I was the best, not because of arrogance, but because I had to. I felt it deep down, like a force pushing me forward. I couldn't control the wave, but I could ride it. When I was in Greenwich Village, surrounded by the folk music scene, I knew that my future was unfolding. I could see the lights ahead, and I felt a pull, like a magnetic force drawing me towards something bigger. I didn't doubt it, because I knew I wasn't the kind of person who gets lost in illusions. Destiny was looking at me, and I knew it. One of the most significant moments was when I saw Joan Baez perform on television. She was the queen of folk singers, and I was just a kid with a guitar. But something told me that our paths would cross. It seemed impossible, but I felt it in my bone. I watched her like she was a religious icon, and I knew that we would find our way to each other, and we did. As I wrote more songs and honed my craft, I felt like I was being drawn toward my future self. It wasn't just about learning new styles or copying what others were doing. It was about uncovering a part of myself that had been hidden, a part that needed to be set free. I was on a journey like Odysseus, trying to find my way home. I had left behind the place I was supposed to be, and I was determined to return transformed. Destiny is a feeling you have about yourself, something that no one else can see. It's a fragile thing, and you have to protect it. If you share it too much, people might try to kill it. But if you keep it close and nurture it, it will come true. I had a strong sense of destiny, and it guided me through the ups and downs of my journey. When I think about my influences, like Robert Johnson, I see how they were also driven by something beyond themselves. Johnson's music felt like it was coming from another place, a place where I is someone else. It made sense to me because I felt the same way. I wasn't just me. I was a part of something bigger, something that was always moving forward. Rock and roll was a way to escape the brutality of the world. When I played, I lost myself in the rhythm, in the sound of the drums. It was a way to see myself from the outside, to become something more than just Bob Dylan. It was a way to be reborn. I remember Allen Ginsberg talking about how I could become one with my breath, how I could focus all my energy on the moment. It's like being a shaman, a bridge between the world we can see and the world we can't. It's about being completely present, letting go of the ego, and becoming a vessel for something greater. That's what it means to follow your destiny. You have to believe in it, even when it seems impossible. You have to be willing to let go of the old and embrace the new. And when you do, you'll find that the world is full of possibilities, just waiting for you to discover them. I've always known I was different. I was a kid from a small town in Minnesota, but I always felt like I was meant for something bigger. In the 1960s, I was swept up in a wave of change that was sweeping through the world. It was a time when people were looking for new ways to see and experience life. For me, that meant diving deep into my own mind, my own spirit, and finding a way to express what I saw there through music. Music has always been more than just notes and lyrics to me. It's a way to connect with something deeper, something that goes beyond the physical world we see around us. When I write and play, I feel like I'm tapping into a well of inspiration that's been there since the beginning of time. It's like breathing, and in many cultures, the word for breath is the same as the word for spirit. This isn't just a coincidence. It's a reminder that our physical and spiritual lives are deeply connected. In the mid-1960s, I went through a transformation that changed everything. Some people call it a crisis, but for me it was a rebirth. I had a motorcycle accident, and in the aftermath, I felt like I was seeing the world in a whole new way. It was as if I had been transfigured, a term I learned from the Catholic Church. Transfiguration is when someone is transformed, almost like they become a new person. It's not something you can just decide to do. It's something that happens to you. This transformation wasn't just about me. It was about the music, the people, and the world around me. I felt like I was part of something bigger, something that was changing the way people thought and felt. I met other artists, like Elvis Presley and John Lennon, who were also exploring these deeper connections. We were all part of a movement that was bringing back ideas and practices that had been forgotten or pushed aside for too long. One of the most important things I learned during this time was the power of shamanism. Shamans are like spiritual guides in many cultures. They can enter altered states of consciousness, connect with the spirit world, and bring back messages and healing. I saw myself in this role, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who could help people see the world in a different light. My songs became a way to share these visions, to help people feel connected to something greater than themselves. There was a moment when I realized that the Bobby Zimmerman from Hibbing, Minnesota, was gone. He had died in a sense, and a new person had emerged. This new version of me was no longer just a folk singer or a songwriter. I was a visionary, a catalyst for change. I couldn't go back to who I was before, and I wouldn't want to. The old me was part of the past, and the new me was part of a new world that was emerging. People often ask me if I feel like I was part of a generation, if I felt like I was a leader. The truth is, I never felt like I belonged to any one group. I was always an outsider, even when I was in the middle of everything. But I did feel a responsibility to use my voice and my music to push things forward, to help people see the world in a new way. Looking back, I realize that my journey has been a kind of spiritual path. It hasn't always been easy, and it hasn't always been clear where I was going. But I've always trusted that there was a reason for everything that happened. I've learned to listen to my intuition, to follow my heart, and to stay true to myself, even when it meant going against the grain. Today, I'm still writing and performing. I'm still exploring the depths of my own spirit and the world around me. I've been transfigured and I can't go back, but I wouldn't want to. The world is full of mysteries, and every day is a new opportunity to uncover them. I hope that my music continues to inspire others to see the world in a new light, to breathe deeply, and to connect with the spirit that runs through us all.